Welcome to my 241st video on my work with OO gauge. In this video I'll be disassembling and repairing a number of Hornby Dublo tinplate coaches, mainly with respect to fixing the glazing, but I did do a couple of other repairs while I had the coaches apart. In this video I'll be working on a couple of different types of Dublo tinplate coaches, the LMS corridor coaches, such as those that came with the Duchess of Atholl train set, and crimson non-corridor coaches of the later types having cut-through and glazed windows. These two types disassemble quite differently. In my recent video, part 237, regarding Dublo articulated coaches, I disassembled the earlier type crimson non-corridor coaches with the windows simply painted onto the tinplate rather than cut through. As seen here, the disassembly of these can be started by simply popping off the roof after pressing on the top of one side. Of course, since they don't have cut-through and glazed windows, this type of coach is less likely to require repairs. In part 239, I worked on fixing up some tricks coaches for Dublo running, and these had badly damaged glazing as seen here, which I replaced. Having done that for the tricks coaches, I figured that I really should attempt to do something similar for my Hornby Dublo coaches with separate glazing, as many of those also had damage to the glazing that showed in quite ugly ways. So, when I was tidying up and storing some of my Dublo rolling stock, as seen in my previous video, part 240, I kept aside all of the Dublo coaches that I had with glazing. In addition to those seen here, there were a couple of trains on the layout with glazed Dublo coaches, one with LMS coaches and one with crimson non-corridor coaches. I checked those and the glazing on them looked okay, so I parked those trains back in the station on the layout. Apart from those trains in the station, I had these 4 glazed non-corridor coaches and these 9 glazed LMS corridor coaches. I took all of these over to the workbench to check them out. Some of the coaches had glazing that was basically okay. Here's an LMS brake coach with glazing that doesn't show any damage, although the paintwork is a bit scratched. I could see that the glazing of these coaches had printing on the glazing parts themselves, as seen in the right-hand windows here, so trying to fix issues with this glazing was likely to be much more tricky than with the tricks coaches, where I had been able to install completely new glazing without too much difficulty. Here's one of the LMS composite corridor coaches. This one has the typical type of damage to the glazing, resulting from the plastic glazing pieces shrinking over time. Sorry this is out of focus, but you can see here that the window in the door at the left-hand end is only half covered by the glazing, and this looks bad. And this is typically what you get when the glazing pieces shrink. Here's the other side of that same coach. The issue is complicated on this side by the whited out windows for the lavatories. The white is pretty much covering the lavatory window, but the failure to cover the door window is obvious. This is another coach of that same type. In this case, the white is clearly failing to cover the toilet window, in addition to the problems with the door window. These 3 coaches basically had glazing that was in good enough condition that I didn't feel that I needed to fix it. That still left me with 6 LMS coaches where I felt some fixing of the glazing was needed. I tried popping off the roof of one of these LMS coaches in basically the same way as I'd removed the roofs of the non-corridor coaches with painted-on windows, basically by pushing in the top of the coach side and then lifting up the roof. I was able to remove the roofs from the LMS coaches in that way. One additional wrinkle with these LMS coaches, which hadn't been found with the coaches with painted-on windows, was that there was this piece fitted between the 2 sides of the coach in the middle. I assumed this was intended as a spacer to keep the tops of the coach sides evenly spaced in the middle, a useful feature in these longer coaches. These LMS coaches had separate pieces making up the corridor and also separate metal pieces fitted to each side inside the glazing, making them quite a bit more complicated. The centre spacer could be removed simply by spreading the sides of the coach a bit and lifting it up. The interior metal pieces on the sides had tabs that went through the floor of the coach and were also held in place by tabs on the top of the coach sides folded down over the interior metal pieces. To remove either the corridor pieces or the side pieces, tabs on the bottom of the coach would need to be bent out. The two tabs further in here are holding on the corridor piece. The red tabs at the side are holding on the coach sides themselves, and the brown tabs under those are holding on the interior metal side pieces. There were also additional tabs hidden under the bogies. The brown tab revealed here by turning the bogie is holding on the corridor piece. I tried bending up the small tabs on the coach sides as I thought this should help me to get at the glazing for repairs. It was very tricky to bend up these small tabs in this rather awkward position. I bent out the tabs holding the corridor piece to the coach floor, including those that were hidden underneath the bogies, which had to be done at both ends for these composite coaches. All of these tabs had to be bent out straight in order to allow the corridor piece to be removed. Once all 6 tabs through the coach floor had been bent out, it was possible to remove the corridor piece. This coach had particularly badly shrunk glazing, so that the toilet windows and the door windows were both only partly covered. I bent up the tab above the toilet window, which was very tricky to do, hence the mess that I've made of it. I did the same thing at the other end of the coach, as both toilet windows needed repair in this case. On the other side of the coach there was no issue with toilet windows, but the door window was still bad. For those door windows I just used a knife to cut away the glazing so that the windows were completely open. Not an ideal solution, but this looks better than having the window halfway covered with glazing from the side, and generally it seemed that it would be very tricky to apply new glazing to these door windows. But on this side I definitely needed to do more. I did cut away the glazing partly covering the door window. Then I cut a strip of plain white paper to about the height of the coach side. I marked how wide a piece would need to be to cover the toilet window. I slid a piece of paper down between the original glazing piece and the outer coach side, which I was only able to do because I'd bent the tab up, and I could pull the interior metal piece and the glazing away from the outer coach side. Here's how that looked from the outside, a definite improvement, I think. I did the same thing for the lavatory window at the other end of this coach. And here's that end after my attempted fixes. I thought that I would have a try at putting new glazing on the door window, and I cut a piece from a blister pack for this purpose. It was really quite tricky trying to fit a new glazing piece. It did look as though it might work up to a point. I cut down the size so that my new piece would fit just over the door window. Here's that repair from the outside. This was so awkward that I didn't really attempt it for the rest of the coaches, just leaving the door windows unglazed if I wasn't able to adjust the original glazing to cover them. I did try one more time attempting to fit a new glazing piece to the door at the other end of this coach. That glazing piece kept moving as there was really nothing to hold it in place, so I applied some 3-in-1 glue with a toothpick to try to fix it. Next I started to reassemble this coach, folding down the small tabs on the tops of the sides. Then I refitted the corridor piece, pushing its tabs through the slits in the floor and bending them over underneath, including the ones hidden underneath the bogies. I refitted the spacer between the coach sides in the middle, and then refitted the roof, completing the reassembly by clipping the roof down over the groove in the top of the coach side. The door windows on this side are just unglazed now, which I think does look better than the way they were partially glazed before. Here's the other side of that coach after reassembly. The toilet windows are now fully whited out, and the door windows here are actually reglazed. I turned my attention to this coach next. One of its toilet windows was particularly messed up, the white having flaked off for some reason, and the door windows were partially glazed as before. On the other side, both door windows were also partially glazed. I removed the coach roof in the same way as before, and then I removed the spacer. Here's the end with the really bad toilet window. You can see that the white has come off in flakes. I can't really imagine why. I folded the top tab up to allow me to get at the toilet window, really a very awkward process. With the tab folded up, I inserted a piece of paper between the original glazing and the outer coach side, and I folded the tab back down. I just went with cutting away the glazing on the door windows, not attempting to reglaze them. I put the spacer back in place, and then refitted the roof. I hadn't put paper on the other toilet window, as I was able to get the original glazing to almost completely cover it. On this side, I slid the original glazing over a bit so that it covered the door at right, and then cut away the glazing from the door on the left. This is another of the LMS composite coaches. It wasn't as bad, but the toilet and door windows at one end were still only partially covered. I took the roof off. Clearly someone had been messing with this coach before, as the spacer was missing and some of the tabs on the coach sides were already bent up. Unfortunately, the one tab that I really needed to have bent up over the toilet window that needed fixing was still bent down. It really is a devil to get something under those little tabs to bend them up, and the metal of the coach sides is quite tough and doesn't bend easily. Once the tab was bent up, I was able to fit a piece of paper over the toilet window. The tab that was supposed to hold the coach side and the coach end together at the top was broken off. You can see the slot in the coach end where it was supposed to fit, but there was no tab there anymore. I used some CA glue to hold the coach side and the coach end together where that tab was missing. I cut away the partial glazing from the door window at one end on the other side. I was able to slide the original glazing over a bit to make it cover the door window at the other end. Here's the side on which I fitted the paper to the toilet window after the coach was reassembled. And here's the other side. The left window is open and the right one is glazed with the original glazing. I had a couple of these coaches with Royal Scot boards on the side. These also had shrunken glazing. Here's the other side of that one. Again, both door windows are partially glazed. I took the roof off so that I could get at the glazing better and also fit paper to the toilet window. Here's that coach after reassembly. Not the best fixing, as the right door window and the left toilet window are not entirely covered. On the other side, I again managed to glaze one door window fully with the original glazing by sliding it over a bit and then cut out the glazing on the other door window. Here's the brake coach that I had with the Royal Scot board. The glazing on the left door is bad, but the rest is pretty much okay. Here's the other side of that coach. toilet windows on both sides in this case. The glazing on this side is basically okay. I removed the roof and the spacer, which worked in the same way as for the composite coaches. The corridor piece on the brake coach is quite different, since the corridor doesn't go the whole length of the coach. I did bend down the tabs underneath to remove the corridor piece, as I needed to grip the glazing to slide it sideways, and I couldn't really get my fingers in to do that with the corridor piece in place. With the corridor piece removed, I was able to grip the glazing with one finger inside the coach and one outside, and like that I slid the glazing to the left a bit and was able to get it to cover all of the windows. I refitted the corridor piece and bent over the tabs under the coach. Here's that corridor piece refitted. And here's that coach with its roof refitted. And here from the other side, the windows are all covered now. Here's one more LMS composite, with glazing issues at both ends again. And at both ends on the other side also. I did a similar thing with this one, sliding the original glazing over a bit and then cutting away the remaining glazing from the door window at the other end. Not perfect, but better than it was, I think. Finally, I turned to the non-corridor coaches with glazing. The glazing on these two was okay, covering all of the windows on both sides. This non-corridor brake had messed up windows at the ends. That was true on both sides. I was initially stumped as to how to get these coaches apart, as it just wasn't possible to get the roofs to move by pressing in the tops of the sides, as with the other coaches. It appeared that the only way to get these coaches apart was to start by bending down the tabs on the bottom, so allowing the body to be separated from the chassis. Of course, you've got to find all of the tabs and bend them out before the body will come off. As well as tabs along each side, there were also 2 black tabs at each end of the coach. Once the 6 tabs on each side, once the 5 tabs on each side, and the 2 tabs on each end were bent out, the body could be lifted off the chassis and floor. Actually, yes, that's correct. There are 5 tabs on each side of the outer coach side. You can see here why I had no success moving the roof. It's held onto the side by tabs bent right through. The glazing is held onto the sides by a whole bunch of little tabs, 10 in all, 5 on top and 5 on the bottom. The glazing piece has no painting on it, but to replace it I would need to bend out all of those tabs, and then to fit a new piece I'd either have to fit all of those tabs through slits in my new piece, which would be really tricky, or to grind off all of the tabs and then glue a new glazing piece in place, which would be really tedious with so many tabs and risk damage with so much grinding. So I elected to just cut away the glazing from the badly glazed windows, leaving the rest of the glazing as it was. Then I refitted the body to the chassis and bent over the tabs. I do think the coach looks better with that end window simply open. And the same thing on the other side. I had one more of these coaches with damaged glazing, and this one was really damaged. Apart from the end windows being partially glazed, a hole had somehow been made right through one of the windows. The other side just had the usual problems with the end windows. This coach came apart the same way as the previous one, separating the body from the chassis by bending out all of the tabs on the bottom. 5 on each side and 2 on each end. This really needed fixing, but it was going to be tricky. I cut through the original glazing beside the broken window. This was extremely difficult, as the glazing plastic was unbelievably tough and almost impossible to cut with a knife. Then I tried to cut through on the other side. I broke off the glazing by the damaged window, not very tidily, I'm afraid. I cut a piece from the transparent window on a Metcalf kit pack, and I slid a piece of that over the windows and glued it with some 3-in-1. Not easy to do. In fact, I messed up my first attempt and had to throw that piece away and try again with a second piece. That repair doesn't look too bad from the outside, certainly a lot better than the ragged hole that was there before. I just cut away the glazing from the window at the right-hand end. And I also cut away the glazing from one of the end windows on the other side. I also put LMS lettering onto these two coaches, as I hadn't done this before. I used HMRS press-fix decals for LMS yellow loco and coach markings for this. So my repairs definitely weren't perfect, but I do think that I managed to achieve a fair bit in the way of making these old coaches look better. I did also do a bit in the way of straightening the sides, etc., whilst I had them apart. I think that's all I'm going to do in the way of coach repairs for now. Next up will probably be another clockwork 00 gauge loco, unless something unforeseen intervenes.